Okay, Michael, welcome. We're going to talk
Welcome.
about your process of recovery through the 12-step program.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is our introductory session,
Mm-hmm.
and to provide an introductory context for how you began your 12-step recovery process,
Mm-hmm.
tell me how you came to make your very first AA meeting.
Okay. Now that requires me to ask you a question. Do you mean any AA meeting, or do you mean when I really came into recovery?
Your very first AA meeting.
Okay. I was on Rikers Island. I was trying to connect with Woody. He was on the other part of the institution, and one of the ways we could do that was that we both went to this AA meeting, and we knew that. And that's how we went and connected. And I remember the gentleman qualifying, um, and that the interest in that could have been further away from me as, say, Tibet or somewhere. China was from the U.S. But Woody was there. He met me there. They gave us cigarettes for coming, and the group was there. And I was looking at the guy that was qualifying, and I felt sorry for him. Because he couldn't drink any longer. And I said, "What kind of life can this man have if he can't drink any longer?"
Mm-hmm.
My very first AA meeting.
And so that was, so you came there sort of like a spectator.
Right. Not really the spectator. I came there to meet Woody.
Okay, so it was a form to get away from your routine
Right.
to be with your friend.
Right.
And so the context of it had really no meaning for you other than you felt sorry for the fellow who was sharing, who was
Right. Right.
leading the group. But at that point in time, there was no context whatsoever or connection for you with the AA program or the 12-step
Right.
recovery
That
process.
was my very first, as I remember it.
Okay, then, well, let's go to this area to go deeper in understanding your initial relationship with the 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the two significant turning points in
Mm-hmm.
your beginning recovery that helped you to genuinely engage AA. And now, specifically, because we've talked about your process over the years, the first turning point that you disclosed to me was talking with the emergency room doctor.
Right.
And then the second one that you disclosed to me is your late night walk to the cloisters.
Right.
Okay, so tell us again, just say about those two significant turning points. What was it about that experience
Mm-hmm.
in your recollection that it was significant, and in retrospect you knew that that was a turning point for you?
Um. Well, the doctor comes first. The emergency room doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Um. The hangovers at the end of my drinking, God willing, was very severe. Woke up the next day feeling depressed and horrible on some level,
Mm-hmm.
physically and psychologically. Um, and that was going for a while, and that was starting to clear up, let's say, the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day after that, I might drink or not. But that weekend, I probably would drink. But at the end of my drinking, I was drinking more often than I had previously to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so one night, something said, why don't you go to the emergency room and just ask one of the doctors about your current recent experience with drinking and hangovers. And I really was going to this doctor for the most part to just have him say something like, "Oh, let me give you this medication. You can take before or after you drink, and you'll be okay." Or let me tell you about eating and how you can eat differently along with your drinking, and that would really help your situation. Something like that, like a quick
Uh-huh.
remedy,
Mm-hmm.
and I would resume my drinking. I had no real ideas about not drinking. That was like foreign from me, like I said previously. wasn't something that fit my realm, my sense of living reality and living a life. If you're going to exclude drinking from it, and exclude drinking, and for me at that time, cocaine, it was like, oh, what kind of life would that be like? But the doctor sat me down. But I have to say, I think there was a part of me, because I had just came home from incarceration from a halfway house, and they used to let us out to go look for a job, and in the weekend we could go home. Now, I just started living in Buddy's building, which is where I'm still living, actually.
1 minute.
In another apartment.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah, so I forgot where I was in terms of the hangovers. Oh, yeah, right. So that's where I was living, and I was talking to the doctor that particular evening, and that's what my life. Oh, that's what I was trying to say. That I did have some reservations about living in Buddy's building and still doing the same thing I had been doing. It had an incongruence to me. It had a level of cognitive dissonance to me, because Buddy was a brother that was like a significant role model for me all my life. And for me to be doing that in his building didn't feel good.
Okay, so when you went to the emergency room, you were driven there because of you needed to find out how to control the after effects of your abuse of your drinking. At that point in time, had you attended any AA meetings?
Previous to that, you mean?
Yes.
And when I was incarcerated, I used to go to AA meetings. I just came home. I tell you, I was in a halfway house. But
yeah. So were you attending AA meetings in the halfway house?
No, but when I was incarcerated upstate, before I came down to the halfway house,
yes,
I was making meetings when I was.
Yeah, and we established that you had made no connection to the meetings when you were incarcerated. But when you went to the emergency room at that point in time, you had no relationship or sense of connection with AA. You just
I wasn't drinking and using and going to AA. No.
You had the sense that you needed to do something though, because you didn't like the way you were feeling, how long it took you to get out of your hangovers.
Right.
Okay, and so at some level there was something there about close to maybe saying I don't like doing this anymore, but
Right. There's an element of that. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's move to your second turning point with where you had that late night walk to the cloisters, and as a matter of background, were you in AA at that point?
Yes, I had made some meetings. I think that was like my first week or so of making meetings. And we're skipping over how I was actually 12 steps, but it's okay.
Well, say that. Say a little bit about that. How were you 12 steps?
I came home, I was drinking, and I was going to a friend's house, a woman that I graduated from Reality House with. Previous to that was the closest thing I ever got to real recovery and maturity. And I thought about her, and I said, oh, let me call Bonnie and go to her. That was her name. And she was in law school at the time. And I said, let me call Bonnie, go to her house. And that probably was because I knew her from Reality House, and that was the closest thing to recovery I ever got. So something was at play there, and when we were going to her house, and I didn't consider myself drunk, but I think she thought I was drunk. And so I remember her saying to me, you need some help, and I didn't know she was in the room. She said, you need some help.
Okay.
And she said, I'm going to set it up with him tomorrow. I want you to not drink and meet this fella at this meeting. And that's what I did. I don't even think she let me in her house that night, that day. It was the daytime.
Okay.
And the next day, I met this fella at this meeting. I remember to be honest with you, this was an NA meeting that I met him at.
Okay.
And he spoke to me a little bit. I said, he told me his name. I forgot how I identified him, but I think she told me what he looked like or something. And he said, Bonnie told me to meet you here, and so forth. Introduce myself to you, talk to you a little bit. He didn't really talk.
So was he the one that 12-stepped you?
No. Bonnie was more the one that 12-stepped me. This guy was really into socialization.
Okay, so how did she 12-step you?
Knew everybody in the meeting.
So how did she 12-step you?
Well, the main thing about me and Bonnie was she knew, and I knew sort of through her about what it was to live a different kind of life. Because we both graduated from Reality House.
Okay, before we go further, for the benefit of our listeners, what do you mean by 12-step? About being 12-step, what does that mean?
Well, she's the one that had him meet me at the meeting. She was in the rooms, and she said, you need to start making meetings. You need to stop drinking. You need to stop drinking and using. You need to start making meetings. And I'm going to help you by having somebody meet you tomorrow at this meeting. And the guy did meet me there.
Okay, so when you say you were 12-stepped, you mean that at that initial point in time where someone, which in this case her name was Bonnie.
Bonnie, right.
Told you, essentially confronted you about your drinking and said you need to go to a meeting. And that interaction in and of itself alone was the 12-step, being 12-stepped.
Right.
When somebody turns and says you need to get involved in the 12-step program.
Right.
Okay.
Right. When somebody says you need to stop drinking and start making meetings, that's pretty much in a nutshell, on some very minor level, the 12-step process.
Okay.
How much somebody 12-stepping you, or they take you to a meeting.
Right. And now, the individual that you met in a meeting, though, he was part of that context of being 12-stepped, because he was the fellow who sort of was the introductory, who introduced you to a meeting. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And then he took me to her house after the meeting, and I was sober this time, or at least abstinent.
Okay.
That's another story.
Okay.
Abstinent versus sobriety.
Okay. So now let's move then over to the second turning point, which was your walk to the cloisters.
Right. I'm making meetings that week, and then the next week, it kind of dawned on me on some level, Michael, I'm saying this to myself, I can say God is talking to me, it's something saying, you're going to have to make a decision about really that you want to make these meetings to get sober and stay sober one day at a time. This is going to have to be a new way of life for you. Mm-hmm. And part of me was like, okay, what's that going to be like? And so I was in my house one night, and that's when that kind of really dawned on me. And you could say this was the third or the fifth day.
Okay.
Being abstinent, making meetings, and probably not even every day.
Okay.
But something said, you're going to have to give this some serious thought.
Something said. What's that?
What's the something?
The something said you're going to have to give this some serious thought.
Right. There was, I think, I would say there was two forces operating in me at that time. One, I would say, was what they say on, sometimes on your shoulders you have a negative on one side. And
you have a demon on one side and an angel on the other.
Right, the devil on one side and the angel on the other, so to speak. And I would say the angel was stronger because of my experiences in drinking and using and what was going on with me at this time.
Okay, so your angelic nature was talking to you, and you were at a place after having been exposed to AA for several days now, where you could hear that voice.
Right, right.
And that voice was what sort of motivated you to take that walk up to
Right. It
Cloisters.
was a very nice walk, evening
Mm-hmm.
walk. It's about 2 miles away.
Okay. Wow.
And I was jogging then, so
Okay.
periodically I was getting back to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like light stuff.
Okay.
And I walked up there to, I think it's called Fort Tryon Park. That's the name of the park. The cloisters are in there,
Okay.
but the park is called Fort Tryon, I think. And I remember getting there and sitting down at night. It's about 10 o'clock at night now, probably. And I'm sitting down there in front of the park. And this didn't really, I don't think, play no part in it, but it was interesting that where I was sitting, Woody lived right across the street. But I was sitting there, and it felt like a fork in the road, so to speak, for want of another metaphor. Because some would say, okay, so what are you going to do? You know, you have these thoughts, you got the other thoughts, you got your history of drinking and using, you got some experience with trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
You came through Reality House. You gained some stuff from there. What are you going to do now? And it wasn't a real decision. It just felt like, and then the doctor, don't forget the doctor.
Well, yeah, we've talked about that. Yes. So now you're at the
liver.
yeah.
And when I got up, I just walked back home, and when I was walking back home, it just felt more like not so much a done deal, but it felt settled in my mind. You're going to start making meetings, and you're going to try to not drink one day at a time.
Okay, now that's an important inflection point for you in your life, because you said it felt settled in my mind.
Mm.
It wasn't a conflict. You didn't have cognitive dissonance, as we say. That you had the sense that you were focused and committed to taking your first steps on this path.
One day at a time.
One day at a time. Okay. Now let's close this session, and we'll start with the next session of this introductory
And of course,
session.
there's more to it than this, but so
Yes.
I'm at Parrot after that.
Yes, I'm sure your audience knows.
Yeah.
So we'll close at this point and pick up again in the second part of the introductory section.